The producers and or one of the creatives, in the case of Hollywood Wives, didn't see me in the role. And I thought in both cases, what's not to see? It was like the first time that this announcer was able to say with relish, "the bastard" on TV. James Whitmore going over and sitting next to Charles Bronson on a movie, and Charles looked at him and said, "Move away." In the golden age of Hollywood, the town was full of men who controlled the business, and the men behaved badly. It was full of a town full of early day Harvey Weinsteins. As she says in her own words in an interview, men would just jump on her. My mother was a lifelong Academy member, and the degeneration of whatever the Oscars have become in 2023 alone, they omitted Tom Sizemore, Anne Heche, Robert Blake, my mother, and I just decided to do something about it. If I move, that's my son just moved back to Dallas from Fort Lauderdale, and he set up an office desk there to do some work. So he's behind me.
Well, we'll hop right into this, and this would be really lovely, Andrew. You certainly had and continue to have a most amazing showbiz life.
Thanks, Craig. It's lovely being here.
I watched on late night telly the other night your Columbo episode, Murder in Malibu. That is one heck of a wild ride, you know, from you playing the villainous toy boy Lothario, the double crosses, the murder, the mayhem, the cover-ups. Tell me about working with Peter Falk, because he was just so exquisite in that role.
Peter was probably the most loose, casual, fun guy I've worked with on a TV show. The thing that was special about Columbo's is that they were each 2-hour movies, and they were on a wheel that alternated with Macmillan and Wife and some other 2-hour shows. So you'd get about one every 3 or 4 weeks. But it was, I mean, as actors, we treated it as a movie, because they were, they probably ran 90 minutes, 2 hours with commercials.
Was he one of those people in breaks that would share some of his incredible stories, for instance, of working with Bette Davis in Pocket Full of Miracles, or, you know, with Sinatra and Sammy Davis and Dean Martin in Robin and the Seven Hoods, for instance?
We didn't talk about that. We talked more about John Cassavetes, because my mother had worked with John Cassavetes in a film with Bobby Darin called Too Late Blues in 60 or 61. And I worked with John as an actor. He was acting in The Fury with Kirk Douglas. Correct. So we had, very fond stories about John and Jenna Rollins to share. And it was kind of a common bond, having worked with a maverick filmmaker like Cassavetes.
You got to also work in that episode with the extraordinary Brenda Vaccaro, who is, as you would know, just one heck of a force of nature, isn't she?
Hiya, doll. It's Brenda. How are you? Yes. We had a lot of laughs playing erstwhile lovers, yes.
To look to your showbiz start, of course, your mum, one of the Hollywood greats, Stella Stevens. And we're going to come to that documentary that you've made about your mum as a great homage. But movies and showbiz definitely are in your DNA, because there's a connection between your mum, your dad, and the movie Battle Cry.
My parents always told me that I was conceived in the backseat of a Mercury at the Skyview Drive-In in Memphis, Tennessee. And the film that was playing was Battle Cry. And my name, Andrew, but they called me Andy as a child, was the character that Aldo Ray played in the movie Battle Cry. So if you watch the documentary that I wrote, produced, and directed called Stella Stevens, The Last Starlet, we actually have a humorous reenactment of my birth. Or not my birth, but my conception.
The internet often gets things wrong, as you would well know, because it states that your first movie role was, in fact, with your mum in that wonderful Vincent Minnelli movie, The Courtship of Eddie's Father. But you're not really seen, are you?
I was visiting the set after school one day, and Vincent Minnelli said, "Hey, we got some kids in a bunk room. Stick them over there." But I'm not in the movie. I didn't speak, and some internet troll decided that that was something noteworthy, but it's really not. It doesn't exist.
But you did wind up in an episode of Jack Webb's hit police series of the day, Adam 12. What are your memories of working on a show like that that was just absolutely red hot back in the day?
Working on Adam 12 was significant to me because it was my very first professional job. I had just moved to Los Angeles at 17, right after graduating high school in Memphis, Tennessee. I had won all of the district and regional speech and drama tournaments, and I won state in for my high school and me personally in the entire state of Tennessee, which caught the eye of an agent. And when I was visiting in the summer before going away to college in St. Augustine, Florida, where I'd won a scholarship for my achievements, he said, "Well, where are you going, kid?" And I said, "I'm going to Flagler College in St. Augustine." And he said, "For what?" And I said, "To get my degree." He said, "In what?" I said, "Theater arts, probably." He said, "For what?" I said, "So I can come back here and be an actor." He said, "You don't need a degree, kid. You need an agent." And I said, "What's an agent?" And he said, "Me." He'd represented James Dean. He represented Burt Reynolds, Jan Michael Vincent, Jane Fonda, Candice Bergen. I think he ultimately represented Harrison Ford. I mean, almost every star imaginable of the day. And he said, "Stay here, I'll put you to work." So one of the first auditions I had was for this small role. I mean, it was 3 scenes, but in a half hour, that was kind of the lead in the show. Playing an Eagle Scout with a merit badge in electronics, and I was 17, but I looked about 12.
1975, you wind up in a little role in the Warren Beatty, Julie Christie movie Shampoo. Now, I'm thinking it was in that skinny dipping scene. Is that right?
It was a 2-week party sequence,
Mm-hmm.
and they were shooting at a big mansion in Holmby Hills. I went on the set a couple of 3 weeks prior to say hello to Warren, and he said, "Oh, he's perfect. You're in." And what was important to me was not the one line I had on screen with Jack Warden. I had been in the hot tub at one point in the sequence. We were all over the house, but at one point, and I'm in a towel, and Jack Warden walks by him. He says, "Do you know where whatever the Julie Christie character's name is?" And I said, "Over there by the tennis courts," in a very high, youthful voice. So, but what was significant to me was I met a lot of people, and we partied for 2 solid weeks, and I got paid for 2 weeks, even though it was only one line on screen.
Yeah, but I mean, look at that cast, everybody from Goldie Hawn and the star Warren Beatty, who was the hottest thing in Hollywood at that point in time.
Warren's great. I mean, we didn't keep in intimate contact over the years, but we would see each other over the years. We sat on a panel together once at the Screen Actors Guild, and I very much respected what he did as a producer and director, as well as a lot of his early work as an actor. And at that time, I had basically quit acting in 1993 as a career, and was producing and directing my own films and owning my own companies, building my own libraries, and traveling internationally in a suit and tie every day as an executive, selling rights to films to all territories worldwide.
You did a movie called A Vigilante Force with Jan Michael Vincent and I think Kris Kristofferson in that as well. What are your recollections of working with those guys?
Well, Kris was the older brother, Jan was the younger brother, and George Armitage had written a character that was younger than Jan, and that ended up being me. So, it was kind of a strange, kind of rural colloquial movie with, kind of a mob infiltration twist. And what I remember most, well, a few things actually. That's the first time I met Victoria Principal. who later was my neighbor. And, she obviously had been on Dallas, and I did a couple of seasons of Dallas before I quit acting. And, Bernadette Peters. And there was a sequence with this kind of buxom brunette where I'm gambling at a makeshift casino, and she's kind of coming on to me, and she says, let's go in the back room. And I say, okay. And we get to the back room door, and she opens it, pushes me outside, that's an alley, and I get beaten up. And that brunette was Loni Anderson before she bleached her hair. But what I remember most fondly is sitting around in Kris's trailer with Jan and Kris playing guitar, singing, drinking beer, and they may have imbibed other things, but uh, it was a good time. I mean, to be able to say that I hung out with Kris in his prime.
And it was so sad, wasn't it, Andrew? I mean, this woman, Loni Anderson, was absolutely adorable and such an astonishing force of nature and a wonderful energy. And to know that she left us earlier this year.
Yep. Very sad. I ran into several people, Linda Gray, Donna Mills, Morgan Fairchild, at a function a few months ago, and they had just done a TV movie with her, and they were all devastated, frankly. And Lonnie and I did a film together after that for Roger Corman, a little comedy film called Munchie. And I lived in a gated community in Los Angeles, or in Beverly Hills, actually, called Mulholland Estates. And Lonnie was one of the neighbors in the community.
The Boys in Company C, Andrew, that must have been a turning point for you in your career, because a great movie about the Vietnam War and so forth, but you were nominated for a Golden Globe Award. And back in those days, those awards had great panache, didn't they? They really did mean something.
I think awards had a greater meaning then than they do now. There's so many award shows, and if you look at the Emmy Awards, particularly daytime Emmys, they all block book and block vote for each other. So it's not really a fair representation of the industry. But the Hollywood Foreign Press, they were really something at the time. There was no internet, there was no social media, and their promotion of you or a film or a television series or miniseries in all territories globally, it was quite important. And that's why the industry courted them as they did. Unfortunately, that was the one year they didn't televise the awards. So I've got a program and a plaque, but that's it.
Did you find that having that Golden Globe nomination, the phone rang more in your agent's office? Did you find that you're in more demand? In other words, was there some kind of knock-on effect?
I didn't find that per se, because I had a film called The Fury that was released almost at the same time, which was directed by Brian De Palma, which had obviously bigger stars with alongside me, with Charles Durning, Kirk Douglas, John Cassavetes, Carrie Star Wars, Amy Irving. And at the very same time, I had been cast in the lead in this miniseries called The Bastard.
Yes.
And it was ubiquitous on television. It was promoted daily, nightly, in the morning, in the afternoon. And it was like the first time that this announcer was able to say with relish, "The Bastard" on TV. And there was this cavalcade of stars. There were 30 major TV stars and movie stars, and they would list this giant roster of stars. And Andrew Stevens is the Bastard. So I had 3 very high profile projects out at the same time, 2 in theaters and 1 on TV. But the name recognition came more from this announcer saying my name over and over.
You got to work with some real greats in that, as you say. It was just full of stars, top to bottom. Olivia Hussey, of course, and Patricia Neal. I know that you share a beautiful story about working with her. I think you were helping her with her cue cards because she wasn't well at the time, was she?
She'd had a stroke. She was recovered, but she had a bit of a speech impediment residue from the stroke. And but we had an emotional connection. she had an assistant that was with her, and I would stand off camera and hold her cards, and kind of raise them up so her eyeline would look as though they were looking at me. And she was lovely, talented, and we just had a very special connection.
You talked about The Fury, of course, Kirk Douglas, one of the stars of that movie. Was it lovely to sit and listen to his stories?
He was fantastic, and more so, I was split focused because I was shooting a series for NBC Universal at the same time. It was a Western series for NBC called The Oregon Trail, and I was in Flagstaff, Arizona. I had to beg the studio to work out the schedule so I could do both. And I was constantly on a plane flying from Flagstaff to Los Angeles to Chicago and ultimately to Israel. We shot 2 weeks in Caesarea, and Kirk Douglas is Jewish, and he was the biggest star in Israel at the time. Everywhere you'd go, Kirk Douglas, Kirk Douglas, and his popularity, but how gracious he was, and so embracing. Come on, kids, sit with us, and. Aside from Kirk, John Cassavetes was there with Jenna Rollins, and we were nearing the end of the Israel shoot. And he said, "Where you going after this, kid?" And I said, "I guess home." And he says, "Nah, you come with me and Jenna. We're going to Rome for a couple of days, buy some shoes." So they changed my ticket. I flew to Rome. We stayed in a great hotel, ate great food, bought shoes for Jenna, and flew back to LA together. So they were just terrific. Everything about that show was really special.
And let's not forget the great Brian De Palma. And it's interesting how you got that movie, The Fury, because he was casting for Carrie, and that was a movie that you really wanted to do. Somewhere in the mix of all of that, you read for the Luke Skywalker role in Star Wars. There was a lot going on, a lot of moving parts at that point in time.
It was several years before The Fury, and they were casting this high school movie called Carrie. And there was this other weird thing I didn't get it at all. I didn't understand the sides of the script or the audition scene. It was called Star Wars. And I'd heard of Brian De Palma. I'd never heard of George Lucas. But they were casting together because they were seeing all similar age group people. And I came in and I was interested in Carrie, but they said, "No, here's the scene everybody's reading." And they gave me this scene I had no context for. And I just, I clearly didn't get it. But Brian had remembered me years later. And what happened on Carrie was, I think William Katz, Sissy Spacek, they're about 6, maybe 7 years older than me. So they cast up, and, like in Greece, they cast everyone significantly older than, actual high school age, because I was indeed, if I'd been held back a year, I would have still been in high school. But, it was a great contact, and it led to a series of auditions for The Fury and ultimately getting the role.
Tell me about working with Charles Bronson, because you have made 2 movies with him. There was Death Hunt, there was 10 to Midnight. And many say that Charles Bronson was one of those people that was very hard to get to know. And initially that was the case for you, but then some way you just kind of penetrated, and he'd share these amazing stories with you and his life experience.
Charlie was very much a loner, a recluse, a very committed family man, and very healthy. He didn't drink, he worked out, and had a physique pretty much like none other at the time. And Lee Marvin, on the other hand, was a hard drinking, hard smoking, profane, wonderful stories. And Carl Weathers and I were in Lee's camp. We were hanging out with Lee, which was, the other side of the world from Charlie. So we never really got to know each other. I mean, we did get to know each other, but we didn't have any significant communication. And Lee even told a story about James Whitmore going over and sitting next to Charles Bronson on a movie. And Charles looked at him and said, "Move away." And so he was not one to make small talk. He was not interested in people trying to get things out of him. So a few years later, I was playing his young detective partner in a movie called 10 to Midnight that J. Lee Thompson directed. And I was, it was cold in LA in the morning, early morning, and they're trying to light us sitting in a car staking out a house across the street. And I had like tissue in my collar so I wouldn't get makeup on my collar. I had my LA Times and a cup of coffee. And I said to the stand-in in the car, I said, I'll sit in. He said, no, I said, no. I'll sit in because I was cold. So stand-in got out. I sat in the car. Whew, okay, it was warm. I was reading my paper, drinking my coffee. A few minutes later, I see Charlie out of the corner of my eye. And Charlie, he's standing there and he's kind of going like this and he's cold. So he looks over at the car, sees me, he motions to his stand-in and he sits down. So I don't even look at him. I just keep reading my paper. Charlie gets bored and they're taking forever to light, and he starts to suck his teeth. Finally, he looks over at me and says, "Good morning, Andrew." I said, "Morning, Charlie." I just turned the page. And little by little, as I didn't pursue him and he felt safe, he started asking me questions. And as I would answer the questions, I would then ask him questions, and like trying to lure a shy dog to eat a piece of steak out of your hand, little by little, I had him talking about working with Sergio Leone and shooting Once Upon a Time in the West. And he said, we shot without sound, and Leone had music for every character. And, in Once Upon a Time in the West, he had a harmonica that he played this sort of plaintive little melody. And he said he would play the music before the scene and then say action. And he said that was acting. And he talked about working in the coal mines in Pennsylvania, playing a blacksmith on stage, and how powerful he felt. And I wrote the story in a foreword for a book about Charles Bronson because not many people get that sort of openness from him. I just played hard to get, Craig.
And so you should, Andrew. Why not? It works, doesn't it? It's interesting because I noted in the 80s you did an Irwin Allen TV series, Code Red, with Lorne Green, with whom you've worked before, and Adam Rich, Irwin Allen, of course, the Poseidon Adventure, which starred your mum. Did he have some lovely stories to tell about your mum, Stella Stevens, back in those Poseidon Adventure days in the 70s?
I think Stella had more stories about her. I think one of the stories was that he invited her to lunch one day and took her to Taco Bell. She didn't know if she should be insulted, but apparently he went there every day. So, he had his old team that had worked on the Poseidon Adventure, and, we're just trying to get a show on the air. And the addition of Adam Rich qualified the show for the primetime access on a Sunday night because ABC needed a show for that time slot.
You've had the opportunity to work with some of the absolute greats. We talked about Kirk Douglas, Patricia Neal. Well, Angie Dickinson is another great fave of millions all over the world, and she was your mum. You were her son in Hollywood Wives, that very splashy TV miniseries, in which you had two roles. There was the actor, former male prostitute, and his psychotic brother. How fabulous was it to play those two diametrically opposed roles?
It was challenging and it was really fun. I did a makeup test for it, and they thought the makeup was too scary. So they kind of homogenized the wig and the beard a little bit.
Yeah.
But they thought it was maybe too much realism for, this glitzy television miniseries. But it was, I've had the good fortune of sharing the screen in series and miniseries with people like Rod Steiger and Anthony Hopkins and Stephanie Powers and Suzanne Summers and Angie. Angie was also in Death Hunt with me. She played Lee Marvin's love interest in Death Hunt, briefly, and we have a lot of laughs. I see her from time to time, and we still have a connection.
I read somewhere that Jackie Collins initially didn't want you to play Buddy and then very quickly changed her mind. What was the story behind that?
Jackie Collins is was she and her husband at the time, Oscar Lerman, they were dear personal friends, or they became dear personal friends through the filming of the show and the promotion of the show. And I was devastated when we lost her. But when the film came up, there were a lot of instances, like on Miracle on Ice, or Hollywood Wives. Miracle on Ice was a 3-hour ABC TV movie that aired a year to the date after the U.S. beat the Russians and went on to win the gold medal. And in both instances, the producers and/or one of the creatives, in the case of Hollywood Wives, didn't see me in the role. And I thought in both cases, what's not to see? So with Hollywood Wives, after I read the script, and of course, every young actor in town wanted to play the role in both cases. And in the miniseries and in the script, this aspiring actor, Buddy Hudson, tries to get the attention of the industry that, he's been beating the pavement and nothing's happening with his career. So he pools his money and takes out a billboard where he's shirtless with a big sign that says, "Who is Buddy Hudson?" And I had just booked a photo shoot, and I had the photographer shoot kind of a horizontal photo of me lying like this with this big logo, "Who is Buddy Hudson?" shirtless with a pair of jeans. And I sent it to Aaron Spelling's office to show Jackie. So they called me in. And I'm not even sure if I read. And she said, "I don't know what I was thinking. You're a Buddy." So, and in the case of Miracle on Ice, the producer, Frank von Zernick, who I later did another TV movie called Forbidden Love with Yvette Mimieux, he told my agent, "No, he's not right. He's not right. He's not right. He's not right." Finally, I begged my agent. I said, "Just get me an audition." And he said, "Well, they're in final skating auditions right now for all the actors for all the roles. They said they'd give you 5 minutes outside the skating rink, not even a formal meeting at an office." So I put a rinse in my hair and I put on 2 sweatshirts and some tennis shoes and a pair of jeans. And I walk up and I say, "Excuse me, is one of you Frank von Zernick?" He says, "I'm Frank von Zernick." I said, "I'm Andrew Stevens." He said, "Oh my God, he looks just like a Rosiani. Oh my God, kid, you got to meet people. I thought you were like this 6'6" swashbuckler from The Bastard." He says, "You got to meet people." And I said, "Well, I've been trying." So they didn't even ask me if I could skate. They cast me on the spot. Yeah. So that's the way it worked at the time. Today, everything is online and virtual. People do virtual auditions. They self-tape and they send in tapes to breakdown services. And you look at this, program called EchoCast. You just click, 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 click. So it's a very different world today.
It certainly is. Murder, She Wrote, again, talking of the great Dame Angela Lansbury, who I've found to be seriously one of the nicest people and with a heart as big as Texas.
I did a fantastic episode of Murder, She Wrote on location in Seattle, Washington. They spent a lot of money on this show. I'm not sure exactly why. And they hired me to play this enigmatic role of her assistant, who was also suspected of some nefarious deeds. And you were never quite sure, is he, isn't he, did he, didn't he? And there was this weird sort of chemistry connection on screen with Angela and me. And then a few years later, they called and said, and they paid me a lot of money for that Seattle show. And they called a few years later and said, "Do you want to do another Murder, She Wrote?" And I said, "It's only a few scenes." And they said, "They'll pay you the same money." I said, "Okay." And people that just watch TV that don't know how magnificent an actress she was, both stage and film, and Sweeney Todd, and I mean, some of the great work that she did over the years.
I'm not sure if you know on it, Andrew, but they're redoing Murder, She Wrote with the great Jamie Lee Curtis.
Are you serious? I love Jamie Lee. I haven't seen her in so long, but I adore her. That's great.
The TV ratings juggernaut, Dallas, of course, you referenced that earlier. 33 episodes as Casey Denault, who was one of J.R. Ewing's oil business henchmen. Larry Hagman was so universally loved by cast and crew, and he certainly had his quirks. The bottle of champagne was always there. How did you find him, Andrew? Was he really lovely and warm and embracing?
He was warm, ingratiating, inclusive, and the only thing I learned is, if you get the words out and he gets the words out, you don't ask for another take. You just move on. But he also directed me in an episode, and he said, "What do you like to do?" And I said, "I play a lot of basketball." He said, "We'll put some basketball in the show." So he worked in a little basketball sequence in the episode that he directed, and he lived out in Malibu. He always had his saddlebags over his shoulder with his personal effects in them, and he was terrific. A couple of months ago, and I've never done any sort of fan event or anything like that concerning Dallas. And I ran into Cherie J. Wilson and Morgan Fairchild in the same month, and they said, "Are you coming to the South Fork experience?" And I said, "Well, I don't even know what that is." And they said, "Well, you live in Dallas. Haven't they called you?" And I said, "No." I said, I've lived in Dallas 20 years and they've never called about anything." And she said, "Oh, it's every year. Oh my God, you've got to come. You've got to come. They'd love to have you." And the next thing you know, some guy's calling me, and I'm thinking, and I'm shooting a movie. I'm producing a movie in Mississippi. So I had to fly back in for the weekend. And I thought, what am I doing? I hate this stuff. I don't really do this stuff. And it was a Friday night, a Saturday, and a Sunday. And there was an event on Saturday night as well, an event Friday night at South Fork. And everyone was so like family, people that you were on the show with, people that were on the show before you or after you. It felt like a fraternity that gets smaller every year because we keep losing people. And the fans were international. They come religiously every year. They watch all 14 seasons of the show every year. They know everything about every character. And for me, it was an interim gig to make a little money while I was trying to quit acting and segue into producing and directing and owning my own films. And I was so glad I did it. And I no one was more surprised than me. I mean, Cherie said to me the other day, she said, "Will you do it again?" And I said, "I probably would," because it just felt like a celebration. And I was very appreciative to them and for having done it.
You mentioned a little minute ago about kind of cooling your heels in the acting world. You are now a super successful movie and TV entrepreneur, producer, writer. You've financed or gotten together as a producer something like over 180 movies, from little independent movies to ones like The Whole Nine Yards with Bruce Willis and Matthew Perry, or 300 Miles to Graceland with Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell. I know you still act, and I know you've got some good movies coming up, and we'll touch on that. But what made you kind of shift gears, Andrew, at that point?
I think the business is ever changing, and an interesting dynamic happened probably in the late 80s, early 90s, in that no television network would ever have done a series or taken a chance on a series or a pilot without vetted television stars as their rock to carry the show and promote the show. And things started popping up. I mean, Friends was a prime example. Aside from Courtney Cox, who wasn't that known, you never heard of any of those actors. And TV, like daytime, started making its own stars. So the resumes that actors had built up over decades of a career didn't really mean anything anymore. And, it's a funny thing about acting when you're in love with it and you don't care about paying a mortgage or a car payment, or buying clothes or eating well, you can make artistic decisions. When you get a little bit older and you have a little success and you buy a house, you got to pay the mortgage or you lose the house. You got to pay car payments, insurance, maintenance, and upkeep. And I was offered Broadway shows 4 times as an actor, and could never reconcile because there was no internet, there was no house swap, there was no Airbnb. So keeping my nut going in LA, going to New York, paying that on top of it, eviscerating my savings, and making no money to offset it, just to say I did a Broadway show. So it's, I retrospectively wish I had, but and I got tired of being at the mercy of other people. I'd grown up a bit. I was a writer. I wanted to direct. I wanted to produce. I wanted to own my own films, and I wanted to be in control and to be the employer rather than the employee. So it took a few years of bartering acting services and doing things that I knew I shouldn't be doing as an actor in order to never have to do it again. And the only things I've acted in since 1993 are, one year I'll get in front of the camera just to earn. Initially, it was to earn my medical insurance, but I still have twin girls that are, I'm 23 years old, so I have 3 more years of getting them their insurance.
Now, look, you've made an absolutely stunning documentary that anybody who loves Hollywood and anyone who, like me, loves your mum, Stella Stevens. It's called The Last Starlet, and your mum died back in 2023 after decades as a great leading lady. Think movies like The Nutty Professor with Jerry Lewis, Poseidon Adventure, of course. And when she died, the Academy didn't include her in their in memoriam segment. And I know, Andrew, you were angry. It was a real kick in the teeth and guts, and many would say quite shameful. So essentially, you decided to honour your mum with this incredible look back at her life. And really, it's so warts and all.
Well, let me touch on the Motion Picture Academy. I've been a member of the Academy since 1978. My sponsors were James Stewart and Rock Hudson. My mother was a lifelong Academy member. And the degeneration of whatever the Oscars have become, in 2023 alone, they omitted Tom Sizemore, Anne Hesh, Robert Blake, my mother, Paul Sorvino. There were a few others as well. Mira Sorvino was apoplectic, and she went on a rage in the press about the oversight and omission of her father. And I just decided to do something about it. And, I was pissed off. And I said, okay, watch this. And I, never made a documentary. I shot it largely in Mississippi. And in order to access the film subsidies there, one has to have a script. And I think most people wouldn't envision a screenplay for a documentary, but I wrote, as required by the state, a 132-page script, which, featured a lot of her old interviews that the film didn't survive. I tried to find a clever device in order to allow her to speak in her own words. I won't give it away, but I hope it works. Most people think it does. And, it's, where there was some archival footage, some, like with her Dick Cavett show, the sound survived, but not the video. Well, what are you going to do with, an audio track of Dick Cavett? But, I tried to let it take its own form, because as a director, interviewing people, hearing what they had to say, hearing their perspectives, not everyone loved the way certain people were presented, but other people gave their perspective. It's almost like Wikipedia. People contribute, and you've got to allow. I believe in the documentary format, you've got to allow other people to have their voices so you're not manufacturing something. And I tried to explore not only her career, but also her personal life, her advocacy against racism, for for humanity, people of all sexualities, and certainly for women's rights. And she was a very strong, ballsy, outspoken woman. People didn't always like what she had to say. Most often they didn't, but she spoke her mind, and I hope that comes through.
It does, and it also gives people a perspective of your journey. You had a fraught relationship with your mum, and that shines through. You were an only child. She went to Hollywood. She takes you. You were being brought up by your grandparents, and there was this kind of kidnapping allegations both way. For you, Andrew, it's very clear that this was a very fraught time, and it kind of set the scene for you and your mum, being close and not close, and years of estrangement and all of that, which for you, was that painful to bear your soul in that way?
No. And the task that I kept trying to instill in my own mind was, this is not your story. You can do a whole nother documentary and tell your story. This is about her. And I struggled with how much our lives intersected, both all the early drama with the custody battle, trying to get custody of me, being a ward of the court, her taking me out of state without a court order, my father kidnapping me back, and uh, all of that is just part of her story. Being in the first film she directed, her being in the first film I directed. These are all things that are part of her story, but I really, really, really didn't want to make it about me.
You've used past interviews of Stella, your mum, revealing how tough it was for women back then. How at casting calls, there'd been attempts to rape her.
She said there were many attempted rapes if she didn't have a chaperone with her. So she would often have to take a chaperone to meetings when she was young because, as she says in her own words in an interview, men would just jump on her. And, Leonard Maltin, the great film critic, and, he says in the golden age of Hollywood, the town was full of men who controlled the business, and the men behaved badly. It was full of a town full of early day Harvey Weinsteins, and the and that's one thing that I tried to highlight was the misogyny of Hollywood back then, and then the transition into the new Hollywood, where everyone started having a voice, which was concurrent with the new wave in France and Italy, and all the avant-garde directors, and in this country, Dennis Hopper and Scorsese, and there was a whole faction of people that really changed the business.
Tell me about the Stella Stevens, your mum, that the world didn't get to see, even beyond the boundaries of the brilliant documentary that you've crafted.
Well, I think people saw the Stella Stevens in the movies. Uh, an amazingly beautiful woman who loved comedy, certainly more than dramatic roles. As Quentin Tarantino says in the documentary, she was one of the preeminent comedians, in the 60s and 70s. But he also says, he said, I learned that in watching her movies that there were two Stella Stevens. One was the innocent, wide-eyed comedian that she played in the 60s. And he said, by the time she got to the 70s, she never played innocent again. And he talks about what strong female characters she played. And she, again, wasn't afraid to, she loved her work, and she would take on any role and do justice to it, but she wasn't afraid to voice her opinion uh, ever.
Interesting too, because she did Girls, Girls, Girls with Elvis Presley, but she really didn't want to do that. And there was some kind of trade-off to do a Monty Clift movie, and that is what made her do Girls, Girls, Girls. And then the Monty Clift movie never came about, sadly.
Correct, correct. Um, I think at the time she was very important to the studio. This was at Paramount, and coming off of Lil Abner and the studio publicity machine. Uh, and again, there was no social media, there was no internet, and the way it worked was, the studio would photograph you everywhere you went, and their publicists would plant and try desperately to get you on the cover of magazines. So everybody was picking up these magazines and seeing Stella Stevens on the cover of these magazines, articles about her, conjectures, all of the Hollywood rumor mill, but played out on flashy, glossy fan magazines, and by the time Girls, Girls, Girls rolled around, she was offered the role that is the girl that Elvis chooses the other girl. And she says, in the documentary, that's not what I had in mind for my career. I didn't want to be the girl that Elvis Presley leaves for another girl. And she thought it was kind of a frivolous piece of fluff, not to disrespect any Elvis fans, but she was treated, in her words, so poorly by the producer and director, she boycotted ever seeing the movie. And I think till the day she died, she never saw it.
Your mum was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and that is just such a poignant part of all of this. So heartbreaking to watch a once vibrant person retreat into that shell of forgetfulness. When that diagnosis was made and reconciling all of that, how did that affect you?
Stella's mother and her great aunt were both very early onset dementia and later full-blown Alzheimer's. And her mother and I were very close. Her mother raised me a good portion of my childhood. And when she progressed to a point that I really felt she was not safe to be in a home alone in Memphis, I went and packed her up and moved her to California and put her in a room in my own home for several years until she progressed so much that we had to put her into a care facility. But I was very familiar with the disease, with the progression of the disease, and in essence, my mother became her mother. And as the disease progressed, and ultimately lost language and the ability to speak with any intelligible enunciation.
I mentioned, of course, and so did you, that you still act from time to time. I note you've got a movie coming soon, Girl in the River, with Devon Sawa and Tiffany Haddish among what is a great cast. Is there much you can tell us about that at this point in time?
Well, no, I'm the producer and the financier. I only acted in it for reasons we spoke of. I have 4 films in post-production right now. One is called 100 Dates in Dallas, and it's a quirky little sort of rom-com with an R-rated edge about the pitfalls and travails of some wacky online dating. I just finished a sequel to the very first Tubi world premiere, which was in 2021. It was a movie called Lazarus, which was an all-black cast.
Yes.
And I worked with Sean Riggs, who actually played Lazarus and created the character, I wrote and produced a sequel, which we just finished, and Samuel Goldwyn Films is going to handle that. And 100 Dates in Dallas is being handled by Freestyle Digital Media, who also is distributing Stella Stevens and The Last Starlet. And I have a movie that is rapidly trying to finish a mix and color correction to screen at the American Film Market in 3 weeks, called The Deputy, which I produced and co-financed, which stars William H. Macy, Stephen Dorff, Tiffany Haddish, and Duke Nicholson, Jack Nicholson's grandson, who's in the leading role. And then just editing The Girl in the River, which stars Maggie Grace from Lost and played Liam Neeson's daughter in the Taken movies, Devon Sawa from Final Destination, Ralph Macchio, and again, Tiffany Haddish. And it's a crime thriller. Samuel Goldwyn Films is going to handle the domestic, and Highland Film Group will handle the international. But I did do my yearly duty and put on a suit and played the senator in The Girl in the River. But you know, I'm slogging away with the finance and the production. Being a producer is like a builder. Most people don't know what a producer does. And there's so many bastardized producer credits that people throw them out like confetti: supervising producer, co-producer, associate producer, executive producer. They all mean nothing. Somebody introduced somebody to somebody and they're a producer. But I insist always on produced by, because that's the only distinction. I'd like to come up with another title, actually, as the actuator, or the guy that really made the movie. But I am the builder. I find the intellectual property. I develop the plans. I do the screenplay. I hire the crew. I build the house. I do the finish carpentry, and I deliver it when it's done, and I service it to all the end users. So everybody else goes off on their merry way. Director's like a construction foreman, and when the house is built, he's on to the next. It's a very bad analogy because I direct as well, and the Directors Guild would take umbrage to that, and so do I. But it's for a layman, that's kind of an explanation. So it's an all-encompassing job, and just the legal and paper delivery is overwhelming, and it doesn't stop until a year after you finish shooting.
You've been very kind with your time, Andrew, and best of luck with the documentary on your mum, Stella Stevens, The Last Starlet, because it really is an eye-opener, and I think you paid great homage to a fascinating, complex, and quite wonderful woman.
But I do feel a sense of accomplishment, and certainly just taking the germ of an idea on Oscar night and seeing it to fruition. I hope that a lot of eyes get on it, and that people are able to see and appreciate the career that she actually had. And I often wonder what she would think, but her friends, many of them who appeared in the documentary, they all it very much reinforced that she'd be very proud.
Well, if you enjoyed that chat with Andrew Stevens, wasn't he a charmer? What about those stories? Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button that's just down there. And if you want to be alerted to our next celebrity drop, make sure you hit that bell button, because that'll go ding when the next celebrity drops. Makes sense, doesn't it? Catch you next time. Bye.